Well, tomorrow, just one day before the session gets underway, Republican House members will meet to select their nominee for Speaker of the House. This is not the typical process to elect this chamber's leader, but with a GOP supermajority, the nominee this caucus picks could render what any Democrat has to say in this matter useless. Joining us this morning is our newsmaker of the day, Republican State Representative Dan Branch of Dallas. This is his 5th term in the legislature. The caucus, of course, meeting tomorrow. Why not unite behind one Republican candidate?
Well, that's not been the tradition in Texas. It's not the Constitution. The Constitution calls for an election of the Speaker on the day we assemble, and we're called in on a certain day, which will be Tuesday, and we can only last for 140 days. And also within the Constitution, it says on that day that the full membership will elect a Speaker.
The voters spoke pretty loudly in November that they want a conservative government here in Austin. Why not pick a more conservative Speaker?
Well, Joe Straus is a conservative, lifelong conservative, worked in the Reagan and Bush administrations, worked for Senator Tower. His family's been involved in sort of helping create the modern Republican Party in Texas. So I think that's a really bad rap to try and say that Joe Straus is not a conservative.
You've got a lot of groups out there posting YouTube videos. They're meeting here in town this week, actively opposing Joe Straus. Have you seen anything like this in terms of a speaker's race?
No, I haven't. And even with all this sort of shin kicking that's been going on of the speaker, there's been almost no movement at all, particularly among the incumbent ranks. I mean, there was a little bit of movement in the new members elect, and so you know here we are. Interestingly enough, 2 years ago, when the speaker to be announced 85 names, former Speaker Craddock, at that time Speaker, stepped aside and acknowledged that that Joe was going to be the new Speaker. This time he has 125 roughly names, and this group keeps pushing, and they haven't had any movement in several weeks now, not even picked up 1 or 2 names. So it's a very odd approach, as why a lot of people don't call it a speaker's race. They just call it speaker theater or speaker drama.
You don't see any lingering bitterness boiling over, or perhaps they're threatening to have primary opponents for people who support Straus?
Yeah, no, I think it would be highly optimistic to think there's no lingering bitterness. I hope that would be the case, but the level of vitriol and bullying here of members that's been directed by either one or both of these other candidates, Paxton and Chisholm, and some of their consorts, has not been appreciated by the membership. I think that's why people are locking down in support of Speaker Straus.
We'll find out what happens this week. And we're going to learn tomorrow the big budget number from the Comptroller's Office, projected maybe $25 billion. How do you go about whittling that down without a tax increase? Well,
obviously we have a rainy day fund, and 2 years ago we were given a pretty big number, and we were fortunate to have the stimulus money come along and help us. But there were people that wanted to spend the rainy day fund 2 years ago. The Speaker has said again, from his fiscal conservative nature, we need to get our operations in order without relying on the rainy day fund, and so the initial budget that will come out in the House will focus on the cost side and looking at cuts and trimming areas, and they've already started that process, looking ahead with about 7.5% of cuts across agencies. So I think we'll start there, and then we'll see how the membership feels about how much of the rainy day fund, which was mentioned. The good news is, from that standpoint, oil prices have been up, and so that fund will probably be approaching $10 billion for the next session. And so we had only had $1 billion for the first time we ever got to $1 billion in that fund in 2007. So we're very fortunate to have saved up these reserves. And the combination of that plus cuts, I think we'll be able to get there.
Where do you think most of the budget cuts are coming this year?
Well, I think you're going to have to be across the board. In the past, you try to preserve education or try to preserve health and human services. Those two items are over 70% of the budget. So if you're going to make significant material cuts like we're going to have to make, then I think everything's going to be on the table.
Do you see a bitter redistricting battle?
Well, I think redistricting, which we have to do every 10 years by Constitution, is something that is always very tough and difficult. If anyone who's ever participated in redistricting elementary school lines, understands when you draw lines, it becomes personal, and members want certain communities and certain precincts in their area, and certain communities want to be either together or not together with certain other groups.
Representative Dan Branch, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you coming in this morning. Well, next, our On Politics panel dives into the issues you've been chatting about with us this morning online. And when you're there, check out our KXAN political blog, where we take an in-depth look inside at what's happening under the dome this week from Session 11. Stay with us.